When a Penn State University senior disappears without a trace on Halloween night, only one thing is clear: she didn't vanish voluntarily. A heartbreaking mystery leads to a tale of real-life monsters in this episode of Last Seen Alive. Thanks for listening to Last Seen Alive. I'm your host, Leah, crime analyst by day and true crime storyteller by night.
And as always, I'm your co-host, Scott.
This is the revisited and enhanced edition of one of our early episodes, which features the unsolved disappearance of Cindy Song. The original edition was recorded in 2020, and we've revisited and re-recorded an episode on her case in 2025. As I'm sure those of you who've been listening since the early days of Last Seen Alive have noticed, our production and audio quality have improved significantly over the years. Lately, we've been working on remaking our earlier episodes. When we originally recorded them, we were doing the best we knew how at the time. However, our best wasn't the best, and we've learned a lot since then. We want to honor those victims by telling their stories with the production quality they deserve, so we've been completely remaking all of our early episodes, including this one. A quick heads up. This episode contains mention of the subject of sexual assault. We won't go into any graphic detail, but still, please listen with care. Hyun Jong, who went by Cindy, was last seen alive on Halloween night 2001 in State College, Pennsylvania. She was 21 years old at the time, and although State College was where she lived, it was a long way from where she'd been born and raised. She was originally from Seoul, South Korea, where she'd lived with her parents until age 15, at which point she'd made a bold change. She'd had family who lived in the U.S., an aunt and an uncle, and they'd been willing to let her come live with them if she so desired. Cindy had decided that it was an opportunity she wanted to seize, and so she made the move all the way from Seoul to the D.C. suburb of Springfield, Virginia. It was a big decision, especially for a 15-year-old, but she never regretted it. According to what her parents later told the Associated Press, Cindy had always had an interest in life abroad, particularly in the U.S. Quote, "She loved the United States. She wanted to see the world, and she heard so many great things about the United States. Even from a young age, she would study American culture and was really fascinated by America." End quote.
Yeah, when you hear about somebody that's been so interested in it for so long, I'm sure she was overwhelmed with excitement of the opportunity and fortunate in the fact that she did have family she could come and live with here.
Yeah, it was a lifelong dream for her. She was very adventurous and very excited. So she ended up loving life in the U.S. just as she had suspected she would. There was so much freedom and so many opportunities in her new home just outside the nation's capital. This was particularly true in regards to education. For most teens, moving to another state, let alone another country, can sometimes induce culture shock, and adjusting can be difficult. But Cindy took everything in stride, embracing the adventure of life in a new country. She excelled in school and completed her high school education in Virginia, graduating with honors. After that, it was off to college, Penn State University, to be exact. Cindy enrolled at Penn State as an integrative arts major. It was a multidisciplinary, student-designed course of study, and Cindy designed hers to include courses in engineering, communications, and science. So, a pretty challenging breadth of study. Even with her challenging course load, she continued to excel academically just as she had in high school. On top of maintaining excellent grades, Cindy worked 2 jobs, one in the school library and another as a server at a Korean restaurant, and when she had time, she hung out with her friends. One of her friends, a young woman named Kim, would later describe Cindy to the Center Daily Times as an engaging and optimistic person. She said of Cindy, quote, "She was interesting. She was feminine. She was an artist. She was neat. She was very cute. She was very optimistic. She had dreams of being very successful with graphic design. She always looked at life in a brighter light." End quote. By Halloween of 2001, Cindy was a college senior just months away from graduation. Her big dream of becoming a successful graphic designer didn't feel far away at that point. She'd even found an internship that she planned to apply for. Meanwhile, she had plans to enjoy her last few months as a student. She had tickets to a Britney Spears concert in early November, which was a big deal. And meanwhile, there was the matter of Halloween. Cindy planned to have a good time, but nothing too wild. She stayed so busy with school and her 2 jobs that she almost never went out on weeknights, but it was a holiday, so she made an exception. She and 2 close friends, Lisa and Stacy, had decided to attend a costume party at a local college bar, Players Nightclub. Cindy had chosen a costume that perfectly suited her style. As her friend Lisa later described, quote, "She had bunny ears and a tail that she bought. It was a very cute outfit. It wasn't like a sexy outfit. It was a very cute outfit. That was her thing. She was very cute. She liked to look cute." End quote. So, in a pink skirt, white tennis skirt, and fluffy rabbit ears, Cindy set out for the club with Stacy and Lisa. Once there, they did a little dancing and had a few drinks, staying for several hours. By 2 a.m., they were ready to leave, but not ready to turn in just yet. They went to a friend's place to wind down by playing video games. When they were done there, Stacy drove Cindy to her apartment, dropping her off and waving goodbye at approximately 4 a.m. And that was the last time anyone saw Cindy alive. Stacy didn't actually see her enter her apartment. She drove away before that happened, but for reasons I'll describe in just a moment, we know Cindy did make it into her apartment. We just don't know for sure what happened afterward. When Cindy was dropped off at her place, she was mildly intoxicated, as her friends would later tell investigators. Once inside, she removed the fake eyelashes she'd been wearing that night as part of her costume and set them on the counter. She also set aside the mini backpack she'd been carrying that night with her cell phone inside. And then, at some point, she left her apartment again. Although we don't know for certain why she left, some have taken an educated guess. There was a 24-hour giant supermarket just a block down the street from Cindy's apartment, and she often walked there to grab a quick snack or beverage, especially after a night of drinking. This was a super common thing for her to do, and according to her friends, this may have been where she went that night when she left her apartment. Now, as I mentioned, Cindy left her backpack with her cell phone inside in her apartment. However, that night she'd also been carrying a small handbag, and since that bag wasn't found inside her apartment, she's believed to have taken it with her when she left. So, leaving her backpack behind wouldn't necessarily have prevented her from paying for any snacks that she may have wanted to pick up at the corner grocery store. She had her wallet in that purse. Now, whether or not Cindy really did set out for the store, and if so, whether she made it there, is unknown. It's just an educated guess on where she might have gone. Cindy was reported missing by her friends on November 3rd, 2.5 days after she'd gone missing. During those 2.5 days, she hadn't shown up to any classes, had missed a planned dinner outing with her friends, and hadn't shown up for her scheduled shift at her part-time serving job at the Seoul Korean Garden restaurant. All of these things were, for someone as dependable and outgoing as Cindy, unthinkable. When investigators searched Cindy's apartment, they found nothing to suggest that she'd planned on disappearing. The only thing that appeared to be missing was the small purse she'd been carrying with her wallet in it on Halloween night. They noticed that there were tickets for a Britney Spears concert that was just a couple days away, and as anyone who was a young girl or young woman in the year 2001 can tell you, a Britney concert is not something that you would bail on unless there were extenuating circumstances, such as mortal peril.
Yeah, that's always stood out. I mean, this was like the height of Britney.
Right, she clearly had a lot of fun stuff to look forward to. Investigators also located a receipt for a computer Cindy had ordered that was due to arrive soon. Additionally, according to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Cindy had left a resume and application for a graphic design internship laying out. Everything inside of her apartment appeared to support what investigators had been told by Cindy's friends. She was excited about her future, both immediate and long-term. Now, Cindy had recently broken up with a boyfriend, which had been tough on her, but definitely not to the point that she'd want to leave everything behind. She'd actually been going to therapy sessions to help her manage her emotions regarding the breakup in a healthy way. Overall, there were no signs that Cindy had planned to intentionally disappear or to start a new life. Nor did investigators have reason to believe that she may have been suicidal, which made her disappearance truly perplexing. Whatever had happened to Cindy, it seemed as if she'd left her apartment willingly and not under duress. The investigator initially assigned to her case at the time of her disappearance, Detective Sprinkle, told Unsolved Mysteries this, quote, "We know that whenever she left the apartment, she was wearing the clothes she had on that night. We also know that her purse, her pocketbook, or whatever she had with her that evening that contained her driver's license and credit cards were with her too, because we could not locate those in the apartment." End quote. So the corner supermarket theory seems pretty plausible, all things considered.
Yeah, I always question whether she made it there or not. I mean, had she made it there, you'd assume there should have been some sort of video footage of her there or transaction receipt, something.
We will get to that in just a moment. Detective Sprinkle looked into Cindy's phone records, bank records, and email, hoping it would help him make sense of things, but it didn't. Cindy's communications had ceased when she disappeared. She hadn't made a single call or spent a single dollar since then, which was a big red flag. Investigators checked with the giant supermarket, Scott, to see whether Cindy had been recorded on any surveillance footage on the night of her disappearance, but unfortunately, by the time they did so, the footage had already been recorded over. Apparently, they didn't keep it for very long.
Yeah, so footage that unfortunately makes sense and isn't shocking. However, with her cute appearance, you would assume that the night teller would probably have made notice or remembered her had she come in, or there would even be receipts that you could have pulled from.
Yeah, that's a good point. It was very late at night. It was about 4 a.m., so probably not a whole lot of people in the store. She was a young, cute woman, and she was even wearing a costume, so you would think that might stand out in employees' memories.
Yeah, it's the exact kind of thing you'd expect somebody to remember at 4 a.m. I mean, it's generally before you get like the early morning people heading out to work, so it's kind of in the lull of the night. It's just odd that there wasn't at least something to go in there, which leads me to believe that she probably never made it that far.
I suspect that you're correct. Now, Detective Sprinkle concluded pretty quickly that Cindy had likely been abducted. Here's a quote he gave to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Quote, "Either someone came to the door and she answered it, or she went to the supermarket. But we believe that she voluntarily left that apartment. It's when she walked out that door that something happened. At 4 a.m., walking alone, going through a dark area, it probably was a crime of opportunity." End quote. Now, those are ominous words because random crimes are the most difficult to solve. If Cindy had been abducted by an opportunist who'd seen her walking alone and who had decided on a whim to victimize her, that could explain the way she'd seemingly vanished without a trace. Of course, investigators also considered the people in Cindy's life, questioning her family, friends, and ex-boyfriend, all of whom were quickly ruled out as potential suspects.
Obviously, that's going to be the first people that you look at because,
of course,
if you can rule them out, or if you can't rule them out, more importantly, it gives you a starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. As we know, when someone falls victim to foul play, it's usually at the hands of someone they know. So obviously, investigations typically start there. But investigators found no evidence to suggest that had been the case for Cindy.
Yeah, and I mean, just starting from that point when you're not sure, at least you have some sort of suspect pool to at least look into people. You're not just looking at everybody in the city.
Yeah. Now, additionally, for the record, just after Cindy's disappearance, police and groups of volunteers had combed thoroughly over the wooded areas around Penn State campus, searching for any sign of her. Bloodhounds had been used in an effort to track her, all to no avail. The FBI had even lent their expertise to the investigation since it was believed to be a possible abduction, but no one had located any trace of Cindy. Cindy's mom traveled all the way from South Korea to State College to take part in the search for her daughter. She stayed for months, determined to find her. She eventually told the York Daily Record, quote, "I believe that Cindy is still alive, and the family believes that she's still alive. As difficult as everything is, we have to hold on to that hope. Even now, I want to cry, but I'm holding my tears back. I'm going to be strong to give my daughter strength. Now, I won't cry anymore. I will find my daughter, and I will stay here." End quote.
That's a very strong statement. It's moving.
Right. I can only imagine the difficulty of flying literally halfway around the world to a new country, setting up a temporary home there, and having to search for your missing child. Now, police were also determined to find Cindy and took every tip seriously. Early on in the investigation, about a 3-hour drive away in Philadelphia, police had received an alarming report. An eyewitness had contacted police in Philadelphia just a few days after Cindy's disappearance and had told them that she'd seen a young woman crying and yelling for help as a man had forced her into a vehicle. The young woman she described matched Cindy's description. There's a caveat here, though. This whole scene had allegedly unfolded in Philly's Chinatown neighborhood, a vibrant cultural hub for Asian Americans within the city. Obviously, there are lots of young women of East Asian descent there at any given time. So what are the odds that the woman this witness saw really was Cindy? It's difficult to say because I don't know how good or how long of a look the witness got of this woman. Had they seen her face? I don't know. But the witness must have been reasonably close because she claimed that she'd actually tried to intervene during the abduction. In response, the alleged abductor had reportedly told her to mind her own business and had chased her off.
Yeah, unfortunately, you hit on all of the key concerns with that. It's easy to hold on to hope, and it's definitely something that needs to be investigated, whether it's related to Cindy or not.
Mm-hmm.
However, my gut instincts tell me that it's more than likely mistaken identity.
Yeah, and obviously, even if the woman calling for help wasn't Cindy, what the witness had reported was alarming. Police took this report seriously enough that they had a sketch made of the man who allegedly abducted a young woman from Chinatown. And Scott, it's uncanny how much this sketch looks like a very specific person. I'm not even going to say who, I'm just going to show it to you just like I did the first time we covered this case, if you recall. If you don't recall, I think you'll know and it'll come flooding back to you as soon as you see the sketch.
It's a pretty detailed sketch compared to some of the ones we've seen.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It definitely looks like the famous actor Christopher Walken, and I'm just thinking of trying to intervene in this situation and thinking that you're being chased down by Christopher Walken.
Yeah, the man in the portrait is a Christopher Walken doppelganger. We are not kidding. If you'd like to see for yourself, we've got the sketch up on our website. The link is in the show notes. And during my research into this case, when I first saw the sketch, I half expected to find conspiracy theories involving Christopher Walken abducting women from Philly's Chinatown neighborhood. I mean, you can find just about anything and any conspiracy theory on the internet where conclusions, however implausible, are often leapt to with astonishing speed.
And I mean, he is one of those very animated actors.
He has a distinct look.
And his quirks. And he's one of the actors that you could see there being this conspiracy about.
Yeah, you kind of could. In any case, I didn't find any threads on such a conspiracy, and ultimately, nothing really came out of the sketch. The alleged witness to the abduction also ended up changing her story several times, leading police to determine she was unreliable and possibly even just making it all up.
I wonder if she did use Christopher Walken as her basis for this. I mean, he was a pretty poppin' actor back then.
He was, actually. 2001 was a big year for Christopher Walken. In addition to acting in 3 different films that year, he starred in Fatboy Slim's Weapon of Choice music video, which was an instant and overwhelming hit and has since received the Best Video of All Time award from VH1, not to mention half a dozen other awards from MTV.
I could see where she would get some inspiration from this.
Right, so maybe this alleged witness was telling a story and just had Christopher on the brain. People have done weirder things.
I mean, those eyes, that voice, his warm personality,
you
can definitely see why somebody would get caught up on him.
Not to mention his dance moves in that Fatboy Slim video. Did you know that he actually choreographed the dancing?
Man of many talents.
Truly. Now, there's another lead, a more plausible one, that remains very relevant to this day. So forget Chinatown Man and forget Christopher Walken while you're at it, if you can, Scott, because I've got to tell you about someone else. This person's of interest's name is Hugo Selinski, and most articles I've read about him introduce him by identifying him as a bank robber, as if that's the defining evil of his criminal career. I don't really get this, though, because although he has robbed places, including banks, he's also a serial killer, and that seems significantly more noteworthy to me.
Yeah, that's the one that I'd be more concerned with. If I'm in a room with a bank robber and a serial killer, I'm probably going to be a little bit more concerned with the serial killer.
Right. Anyway, fans of The Office will know what I mean when I say that Selinski is a real-life Scranton Strangler. Literally, he lived in a tiny township just a 30-minute drive from Scranton and has been convicted of killing at least 2 of his victims via strangulation. I genuinely wonder whether he may have inspired the minor side character in the series.
Well, I would never want him to be able to be credited in a piece of art as great as The Office.
You know what? You're right. I take that back. Now, at the time of Cindy's disappearance in 2001, Selinski's murderous crimes weren't yet known. He was still living in that little township outside of Scranton, more or less under the radar. It wouldn't be until 2 years later, in 2003, that an excavation of his backyard would reveal him for what he was, a murderer. And it was Cindy's disappearance that led investigators to excavate the property in the first place. Here's what happened. In 2003, investigators received a tip regarding Cindy's disappearance from another murderer who was incarcerated at the time. According to what this other murderer, whose name was Paul Weekly, told police, he knew exactly what had happened to Cindy. He claimed that Hugo Selensky had murdered Cindy along with the help of a buddy of his named Michael Kurkowski. Kurkowski, he explained, was a pharmacist who ran an illegal drug ring, which was probably why he and Selensky were friends. Anyway, according to Weekly, Selensky and Kurkowski had been hanging out together on Halloween night in 2001, cruising the streets of State College when they'd seen a young woman walking down the street alone dressed as a bunny. They'd abducted her, supposedly thinking she was a prostitute for some reason, and had taken her back to Selensky's house and imprisoned her inside of a large vault. There, they'd allegedly repeatedly sexually assaulted her over the course of several days, and had then ultimately left her in the vault, no doubt in immense physical and psychological pain, to die a slow and lonely death. And the described horror doesn't end there, not even close. According to Weekly, Cindy was just one of the victims who'd been killed at Selensky's house, which sat on 7 acres of land in rural Luzerne County. Weekly told stories that made the property sound like an amateur version of a body farm. He said he'd seen a woman and a child stuffed into a well, pieces of a shattered human skull beneath the porch, and even a drug dealer's arm hanging from the mouth of Selensky's dog like a piece of roadkill.
I mean, it's all a bit fantastical.
Right.
For what you'd expect once law enforcement actually got to the property.
Yeah.
Like, those kinds of claims should be at least pretty easily verified.
Yeah, these claims may sound outrageous, but Weekly presented them convincingly enough that investigators secured a search warrant for Selensky's property, and it was a good thing they did. Armed with the warrant, they descended upon Selensky's property, conducting a broad search for human remains, with Weekly serving as their guide. As it turned out, Weekly's claims hadn't just been talk. He delivered on his gruesome promises. What investigators unearthed on Selensky's property was every bit as horrifying as he'd described. More on that next. And now, back to Cindy's story. After 21-year-old Cindy Song vanished from State College, Pennsylvania on Halloween night, investigators took every lead they received seriously. One of those leads came from an incarcerated murderer and almost seemed too outrageous to be true. It wasn't, though. The informant, a man named Weekly, had told them that another man, another killer, according to him, had buried multiple bodies on his property in rural Luzerne County. After obtaining a warrant to search the property in question, which belonged to Hugo Selensky, investigators learned that that was in fact true. During their search of Selensky's property, police didn't find any remains inside of his house. The backyard, though, was another story. It had been turned into a secret graveyard. One by one, investigators unearthed 12 separate sets of human remains from Hugo Selensky's backyard. According to an article from the Morning Call, each of the dozen bodies were so badly charred that forensic anthropologists were summoned to lend their expertise in identifying the remains and trying to make sense of them. Ultimately, at least some of the bodies were definitively identified. I'm uncertain if all 12 have been ID'd, but I do know this. Despite what Weekly had claimed about Selensky murdering Cindy, none of the dozen bodies found buried in the backyard belonged to her. So, did Selensky and his friend really murder Cindy? A tip that led to the discovery of a serial killer's mass graveyard certainly can't be brushed off. Even if Cindy wasn't found, investigators still recovered the remains of a dozen missing victims, all because of that one jailhouse tip. Selensky, perhaps unsurprisingly, denies having abducted or killed Cindy. Actually, he denies all of the murders of which he's been accused, even the ones he's been convicted of. His official story is that he didn't kill anyone, and he has no idea how those dozen bodies came to be in his backyard. So there's little hope that he'll confess to any role in Cindy's disappearance, even if he was involved.
I don't see how you're going to argue that.
Right, well, Selensky didn't try to explain or argue it. He just kept his mouth shut, which honestly is the smartest strategy when you're in a situation where you're caught. Now, what about Selensky's alleged accomplice, though, Michael Kurkowski, the criminal pharmacist who considered Selensky his best friend? Well, investigators couldn't ask him because Selensky had murdered him too.
I wonder if that's the arm of the drug dealer that was mentioned.
I'm not certain. It could be. In 2002, Selensky decided to get rid of his buddy. Additionally, so as not to leave any loose ends untied, he killed Kurkowski's girlfriend, Tammy Fassett. According to a statement from a grand jury, Selensky tortured Kurkowski and his girlfriend Tammy before beating them with a rolling pin and ultimately fatally strangling them with zip ties. He then burnt their remains and buried them in his backyard. And this is not just a theory either. This is something Selensky has been convicted of and is currently serving a life sentence for. That's what happened. Now, while we're on the subject, I think it's safe to say that Kurkowski, the pharmacist, being involved in Cindy's murder seems pretty unlikely. Kurkowski had no history of such crimes, unlike Weekly, who waited until after Kurkowski was dead and unable to defend himself to accuse him. Selensky hadn't killed Kurkowski and his girlfriend alone either. He'd had an accomplice. That accomplice had been Weekly. He'd helped him to murder the couple and eventually admitted to it in court. So if anything, I suspect that if Selensky really killed Cindy and had an accomplice, it was Weekly.
It wouldn't be the first time we've heard of somebody trying to do the mental gymnastics of blaming somebody else for being the one to do it when they were really secretly confessing to their role in it.
Right, telling the story of what had happened, but subbing in another person who's conveniently dead for yourself.
Now, given how close Kurkowski and Selensky supposedly were, I could see him potentially having played some role with some of the victims, but I don't think it was necessarily the one to assist with the murders.
It's difficult to say. Now, back to the murder of Kurkowski. As for why Selensky had wanted to kill his longtime friend, it's generally believed that he did it for money. Kurkowski had accumulated a lot of cash from his illicit drug dealings and had hidden about $60,000 of it in his house. Selensky, who had a long history of committing robberies, had decided that he wanted that cash for himself. And he'd wanted it badly enough to kill the man who considered him his closest friend, not to mention his girlfriend, an innocent woman. I guess it's like they say, there's no honor among thieves.
That's really the only reason I could see him killing the girlfriend also was to prevent anybody from being able to stop him to acquire this money.
Right. I don't think they had originally planned to kill her, but when they met with Kurkowski, she was with him, so they felt that they had to because, they didn't want her to be a witness.
The other thing that it does is it explains why he would torture them, because if he was torturing them to get the money's location...
That is exactly what he was doing.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense and would play right into that piece.
Yes, that's what happened. Now, at the time of that murder, Kurkowski had been about to go to prison for his drug crimes, so Selensky knew that if he wanted to find out exactly where the hidden cash was, he had to act fast. He betrayed his friend in the 11th hour, killing him just before he was due to be officially sentenced and begin serving his prison time. According to Weekly, he and Selensky had figured that the timing was ideal. They'd kill Kurkowski and conceal his body, and everyone would just assume that he'd fled the area and had gone into hiding in order to avoid having to serve his sentence. Now, while we're on the subject, I should also note, at one point, Weekly claimed to investigators that the real reason Selensky had wanted to kill Kurkowski hadn't been about money. It had been because Kurkowski had kept the bunny costume ears Cindy had been wearing on Halloween night as a souvenir, which Selensky didn't approve of. However, there's reason to believe that's not true. According to court documents, at the time Selensky was purchasing that property that he lived on, with the secret graveyard, and he needed money for closing costs, and that was what motivated him. As for the rest of the bodies recovered on the property, Selensky hasn't been charged with all of their murders, only 4 so far. This was true when we first recorded our episode on Cindy's case, and it appears to still be true today. Most likely, Selensky will never be charged with all of them, as the legal proceedings would be extremely expensive and time-consuming for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and Selensky is already going to spend the rest of his life in prison anyway.
The only reason I could see them prosecuting more cases at this point would be if he somehow gets his life imprisonment overturned and is eligible for parole, then get him on new charges to keep him in prison.
Right? It's nice to have other cases like that in your back pocket in case an emergency like that arises, because clearly this man is going to hurt people if he's left out. Now, I will say he has jumped through some legal hoops to try to get his conviction overturned, but he has not succeeded so far.
I know, but just given some of our very recent cases, if I was the prosecutors, I would definitely have the case ready for some of them and be ready to go just in case.
I totally get what you're saying. Now, for what it's worth, although investigators did not locate Cindy's remains on the property, all of the other details Weekly had told them about Selensky's crimes had pretty much panned out. They had found proof of every other story. The murdered drug dealers, for example, that was true. They found bodies from drug dealers there and were able to identify them. Cindy was the only story they weren't able to corroborate with physical evidence, which made them wonder. What if Selensky actually hadn't killed Cindy? What if Weekly had been the real killer and had used his knowledge of Selensky's House of Horrors in an attempt to frame Selensky for his own crime by casting the blame his way, shuffling Cindy's murder in with a bunch of other homicides that he knew investigators would find evidence of on Selensky's property?
I mean, that goes right along with blaming somebody that can't defend themselves as the henchman.
Right. Now, when Weekly told all this to investigators, he was already in prison. So maybe he thought that it could help him get some leniency with his sentence or something. Who knows? Now, Selensky and Weekly had originally met in prison and had become buddies in a way that only a couple of probable psychopaths who are apt to turn on each other on a dime can be. Once free, they'd work together to commit robberies. For example, there was an armed robbery of a local jeweler they'd committed less than a year before the murders of Kurkowski and his girlfriend. So, Weekly definitely knew Selensky and his property pretty well. Could he have used that knowledge to frame his friend for a murder he hadn't committed?
Absolutely possible.
Seems possible to me. When it comes to considering Weekly as a suspect, it's important to keep in mind that Weekly, like Selensky, is a convicted murderer with a history of assorted, serious criminal offenses. Remember, he was Selensky's accomplice in the murders of pharmacist Kurkowski and his girlfriend Tammy, so there's no doubt that he's objectively capable of murder. Of the two men, though, if either of them are responsible for Cindy's death, is Selensky or Weekly the most likely culprit? The vibe I get from reading about these two is that Selensky was more or less the deranged brains of the duo, and Weekly was sort of a subservient sidekick. To the best of my knowledge, the murders Weekly committed alongside Selensky are the only ones he's committed. As for Selensky, well, all those bodies got in his yard somehow.
The main question I have is how many of those bodies would also be tied to Weekly? Because if he was present for all of them, then that would be a little bit more reason to suspect him.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And maybe the whole sidekick vibe is the impression that Weekly wants people to come away with. Maybe he wants us to think he had less agency than Selensky so that we view him as somehow being less responsible for the crimes they committed together. I don't know. In any case, I suppose it's only logical to consider that Weekly and Selensky could have killed Cindy together as they had Kurkowski and Tammy. Maybe they were the ones who were cruising through State College on Halloween night. Although Weekly alleged that he knew how Cindy had been killed because Selensky had told him, maybe the real reason he knew about what had happened to her was because he himself had been the accomplice, had been involved in her death.
Why would Selensky tell him and implicate himself in this to somebody that wasn't there and wasn't involved?
Right, for a criminal, Selensky seems unusually good at keeping his mouth shut, so I kind of had the same thought. I get where you're coming from. Now, given these guys' violent criminal histories, there's a really tangled web of possibilities here, and so far, investigators have not been able to unravel them. Now, there is some reason to believe that Weekly may have been telling the truth about Selensky and Kurkowski abducting and killing Cindy, though, and that reason is the fact that Kurkowski is dead. You know, financial motivation aside, if he and Selensky really did murder Cindy, it's not difficult to believe that Selensky might have killed him in order to make sure that he couldn't betray him and tell anyone about their joint crime. You know, maybe, as Weekly had suggested, that had been his primary motivation, and the money had been more of a bonus motivator, or it was just a two birds with one stone situation. And I say this because we have really good reason to believe that Selensky would be willing to murder an accomplice. I say that because after Weekly tattled on Selensky, which resulted in the unearthing of his yard skeletons and him being indicted on multiple murder charges, Zelensky attempted to put out a hit on Weekly so that he couldn't testify against him. Now, unfortunately for Zelensky and fortunately for Weekly, Zelensky messed up big time when he tried to place that hit. Let me explain. It was a prison buddy of Zelensky's who actually attempted to solicit the hit. We can assume at Zelensky's direction. So Zelensky's buddy approached this hitman in prison multiple times, offering him the princely sum of $1,000 to make sure that Weekly was murdered. This was to be accomplished through the prison gang network, which the hitman was associated with. That might not seem like a lot of money, but everyone involved is incarcerated here, and $1,000 goes a long way at the prison commissary. Anyway, unbeknownst to Zelensky's buddy, the alleged assassin was not actually associated with any gang. He wasn't even a hitman. He was an undercover state trooper who'd been playing them all along in this undercover role as a prison inmate.
It's the kind of thing that you hear stories about, but you never think they're real, because how do you trick somebody that well?
Right, like who's going to agree to go undercover in prison? Well, this guy, and he did. And there went the big plan to have Weekly taken out of the picture.
I just want to know how he convinced them that he was part of this prison gang network. Theoretically, there should be other members of this prison gang interacting with these, or at least nearby. Like, somebody's going to know you're not legit.
I am very curious about the details of this undercover operation. So anyway, Zelensky's buddy later pleaded guilty to attempting to solicit the hit. Regardless, in a 2009 interview with Penn Live, Detective Sprinkle said that the Hugo Zelensky lead remains the only active lead in Cindy's case, and that may still be true today. And while it's certainly a compelling lead, there's one thing that stands out to me. Zelensky, to the best of my knowledge, was not known to commit sexually motivated homicides like the one Weekly claims he perpetrated against Cindy. The homicides he's known to have committed seem to have been financially motivated, more practical crimes of greed related to a criminal lifestyle. At least that's the case for the ones we know the details of. If Zelensky really abducted and murdered Cindy, that seems to have been a deviation from his usual MO. What if he never deviated? What if the whole Zelensky theory is just this really complex red herring?
We've touched on it a few times. It could be Weekly just throwing Zelensky out there while pseudo-confessing.
Now, on the other hand, maybe Zelensky had other criminal proclivities and crimes, such as sexually motivated crimes, that we're simply not aware of. He was obviously a ruthless killer, and he's not the type to brag about crimes he's committed. He seems more intelligent than that. He's remained resolutely tight-lipped about his crimes and has never admitted to any of them, not even the ones he's been convicted of. There's little doubt that he has secrets. Today, although Cindy is still considered a missing person, her disappearance is treated as a probable homicide. Investigators believe that her life was stolen from her that Halloween night. At the time of this episode airing, we're coming up on the 24th anniversary of Cindy's disappearance. Her family and friends have been waiting all this time for answers. One of them, her supervisor at the college library where she'd worked, told the Center Daily Times that Cindy's disappearance had given her a new, painful understanding of what the loved ones of missing persons go through. She said, quote, "Everybody hears about these cases, these missing persons cases. Until you know someone and until you meet some family members of the missing person, I don't know. You just don't realize what that means in their lives, that kind of void." End quote. If you know anything about what happened to Cindy Song, please contact the Ferguson Township Police Department at 814-237-1172.
That's all for this episode of Last Seen Alive. Thanks for listening. Make sure you check out our website, lastseenalivepodcast.com, for photos from the story and links to the sources we used to write it. While you're at it, follow us on Insta at LSA Podcast and TikTok at Last Seen Alive Podcast. Episodes of Last Seen Alive air every Monday. See you then. If you think bringing unsolved cases like Cindy's to the public's attention is important, please take a moment to rate or review Last Seen Alive and tell your friends to check us out too. We'd really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to check out our merch store where you can get an LSA t-shirt or hoodie. We donate 50% of the proceeds from every sale to the DNA Dope Project. Last Seen Alive is a Studio 222 production. Research and writing for this episode is provided by you, Leah. Audio engineering, editing, and hot takes are provided by me, Scott.